It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Hey, welcome back to the program. We have the president of the Family Council, Mr. Jerry Cox, is back on the line. Jerry, it's always great to have you on, sir. Good morning.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Tell us, Jerry Cox, about this big announcement. I've seen it in the press. I've seen it in the press releases. You are doing a 30-city tour, right?
Yes, we are. In fact, we're launching it next week in Pine Bluff, and we are going to travel about 3,000 miles, and we're going to visit 30 cities around the state of Arkansas to tell people how bad Issue 1 is, how bad the so-called tort reform amendment really is. And so my staff and I are going to fan out all over the state of Arkansas, and we're having free breakfast in one town, and then we're headed down the road to the next town. We're doing a free lunch, and we are covering 30 cities, 3,000 miles in about 15 days.
That's going to be a lot of work, but I mean, we are almost a month away from the November 6th election, where people are going to have to decide whether or not they think the Issue 1 is something that's a good thing. I mean, I think it's a terrible idea. I know you think it's a terrible idea as well. I see here in the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, they talk about visiting church groups and things like that. What is the what's the attitude like among church going folks?
Well, I'll tell you what, any group that I've sat down and visited with gets it, because you just lay out the facts. There's good tort reform and there's bad tort reform. Issue 1 just happens to be really bad tort reform. And I can't help that. I didn't write it. It was written by lobbyists for the nursing homes and other big corporate interests, because they don't like getting sued when they mess up and they hurt little people. And so if you want these big corporate interests to be shielded from lawsuits when they hurt a member of your family, then I'd say go ahead and vote for Issue 1, because that's exactly what it does. And when you explain that to people, people say, well, that's not right. That's not fair. It tips the scales of justice against average people. It shields these big, bad actors out here, and we don't want to do that. So we need to vote against Issue 1. And so that's the message that we're taking to the people of Arkansas. But more importantly, we're going to do our best to meet with the newspapers in these small towns around the state, because people read those papers. They're an important news source to people that live in small towns. And if it's a weekly paper, it'll lie there on the coffee table for an entire week. Mm-hmm. And so we want to get the message out as best we can through these local papers around the state as we travel and do these events.
Some of the, some people who are for this, Republicans who typically consider themselves to be pro-life, they've had a problem with, Family Council and you, Jerry, and others. Rose Mims from Arkansas Right to Life personally opposes Issue 1 because it's not pro-life. And that, to a Republican who supports Issue 1, they think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be called. So how is that being received, and how beholden are you? I mean, when you talk to people, do you bring up this phrase of being pro-life?
Well, it certainly is a human life issue. There's no doubt about it, because it puts a price tag on human life. It says that if a big corporation kills a member of your family, it caps the non-economic damages. And if that's a child, if that's an elderly person, if it's a disabled person, then those are the only damages you can probably collect. And so it caps those. So it does put a price tag on human life. It devalues the lives of these people that don't have an income, what the Bible would maybe call the least of these. And so I told some people the other day, I said, whether you call it pro-life or you call it something else, it doesn't change the content of Issue 1, and it doesn't change the effect of it. So rather than to get out there and squabble about whether or not it's a pro-life issue, I'd rather just say, you know what, call it what you want. It's a human life issue. I'm convinced of that. If you want to call it pro-life, I'm with you. If
Yeah.
you want to call it something else, I'm with you, as long as you're against issue one. And that's the important message that we need to get out.
Yeah, and there's also an important aspect of this is to look at incentive. And if you're a nursing home and you have practices that eventually, every 100 patients or so, or I don't know what the ratio would be, but you're going to have a situation where the nursing home is messed up. They have neglected somebody. Well, if they get sued and they lose, that is incentive for the nursing home to attempt to correct the behavior. But if it's capped at $500,000, these nursing home owners make a whole lot of money. Now they can just factor that in as the business model, as a cost of doing business.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly what they will do, because nursing homes are for-profit enterprises. About half of them here in Arkansas are owned by one man. And so he's making boatloads of money. Well, his people are out there lobbying the Capitol, the lawmakers, every day during the legislative session. And their fingerprints are all over issue one because it helps his bottom line. He can cut back on services, even cut back on food if he chooses to, I suppose. But certainly cut back on staff, make more money, and not be worried about being held accountable if just a few old people die. I mean, what's that? It's just another number on the bottom line, I fear, to some of these entities. And so it's not just nursing homes. It's reckless trucking companies. It's industrial polluters that pollute the creek behind your house. It's racist companies that practice racism in their policies. And you try to sue these people and hold them accountable, and you're going to hit a brick wall out there, and it's called issue one, and it's a cap on the damages that they have to pay when they do something really bad. And that's just not fair, because under our current system, if somebody hurts you or a member of your family, you can take them to court and plead your case to a judge and a jury, and they decide, based on the merits of that case, your case, what the damages ought to be. If issue one passes, you're going to have a one-size-fits-all cap that applies to every case before it ever happens, and they're going to say, we don't care about the facts, we're just going to allow this much, and that's the end of it. And again, that's not justice, and it's not fair, especially to people that are not lobbyists, that don't have a team of lawyers on staff all the time. Regular folks depend on this as a way of getting justice, and it's guaranteed under the Seventh Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And I'm afraid that these ads that are on TV are tricking people into voting away their constitutional rights.
So how are they tricking people? What are some of the things that these ads are telling folks that are
well,
not true?
My goodness, they're saying, oh, vote for issue one. It'll bring jobs to Arkansas. And that's the tired, old, worn-out line that people use for everything that they want to persuade you into voting for it. It's vote for this. It'll create jobs. There's absolutely not a shred of evidence that this is going to create even any jobs whatsoever. And we've looked at other states that have passed laws a little bit like this, although this one is more far-reaching than any state law we've been able to find anywhere. And we can't find any evidence that tort reform like this created any jobs. There are other factors that create jobs. May I say, like a better tax structure, like Texas has? May I say, like less government regulation? Amazing. Imagine that. But that's not what they're trying to do to create jobs. They're rolling this thing out here, and they're packaging it as a jobs creator, when in reality, it just protects these big corporations from lawsuits when they hurt somebody.
Yeah, and you know what? Even if it did, I mean, I know it doesn't, but even if it did create jobs, at what cost? And it's the cost of the most
exactly
vulnerable.
right. That's exactly right. And I've said this: even the people like these big corporations and companies that issue one is designed to help, they have an obligation to do what's right for their neighbor that it's going to hurt. And the Bible is very clear about justice, and especially justice for the poor. And it says very clearly in the book of Proverbs, don't take advantage of the poor just because you can. don't take advantage of the poor in court just because you can. And issue one, in my opinion, takes advantage of regular people in court, and it's people doing it just because they can, because they don't want to be held accountable when they do something wrong.
We're talking with Jerry Cox of the Family Council. He's announced that next Wednesday is going to start a 30-city tour where he's going to be getting the word out about why Issue 1 is bad and why the people of Arkansas need to reject it and vote against it on November 6th. Jerry, while I have you, I'd like for you to talk about another aspect of Issue 1. It allows the legislature to blur the line of separation of powers and set rules of evidence for a courtroom. Now, you have been down there for a very long time, and you have seen how quickly some piece of language can get slipped into this legislation or that legislation. So, how trusting are you that they won't use their ability to set rules of evidence because some special interest influenced them to put a piece of language somewhere?
Paul, they already tried it back in 2003. And you're right, I've been out there a long time, almost 30 years. I've seen a lot. Back in 2003, the nursing homes tried to get their own version of tort reform pushed through the legislature, and they went so far as to try to get the legislature to pass a law that says state inspection reports of nursing homes could not be used as evidence in an abuse case against when an old person has been hurt in a nursing home. They tried to say that past instances of abuse or neglect couldn't be talked about in the current lawsuit that was being filed. So they could, injure half a dozen more people, kill them, lead to their death, and you can't talk about that. That's the kind of shenanigans that the nursing homes tried back in 2003. Those same nursing home owners are still there. I see people out there, and we're kidding ourselves if we think that they're not going to come in if issue one passes and tell the legislature, whisper in their ear how to pass laws determining what kind of evidence can be introduced if you have a grievance against the nursing home and take them to court. And so the cap, in some ways, it becomes the cap on damages could become irrelevant if they so restrict the evidence. You'll never even get to the courthouse because you won't have enough evidence to mount a lawsuit when one of these big outfits does something bad to a member of your family or to you. And so that's a hidden dagger that's in issue one that most people don't talk about, but it is extremely dangerous and could be the worst thing about issue one.
So, Jerry, we're out of time. Can you tell us, if people want to be at these events in the different cities, people are listening all across the state, where can they find the schedule of where you're going to be?
Go online to voteagainstissue1.com, voteagainstissue1.com, and the schedule should be on that website. We're going to cover 30 cities. We start next week. We wrap it up on the 16th down in Nashville, Arkansas. And so if people want to come and get a free breakfast or a free lunch and hear us talk about issue one, or just come and say, attaboy, glad you're doing this, we'd love to see you face to face.
All right, Jerry Cox, I appreciate it as always. Good luck to you, and we'll do this again soon.
Thanks.
All righty, Jerry Cox, everybody.